Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien and Bubba here on Sunday, July 14th, sitting in for Paul Harvey today. Stand by for commentary. Well, here it is, July 14th. It's the week of your best endeavor and your worst failure. I'm talking about the week of July 16th through the 20th, Apollo 11. And here's why it's your best endeavor and feat, and your worst failure. When the Russians stunned the Americans by putting up Sputnik in 1957, President Eisenhower, he started what today you would call race. But really, it was President Trump's idea of a bully. You know, the bully on the block here, the big bully has said, I double dare you to cross this line. That's the Russians. And the Americans, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. They did. But as Mr. Harvey would say, at least for the first 12 years, you read my gospel of hard work. And I'll try to define this gospel of hard work. And if you don't know, look up Mr. Paul Harvey on the gospel of hard work. He was preaching it all through his life. And I guess today nobody ever listened to it, understood it, or took it to heart because you're still right where you were when he was preaching. Even worse, I think. But President Eisenhower anywhere did this. He created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, and the Mercury program. Now, the Mercury program was to try to catch up to the Russians because they had already launched uh, Sputnik. And you launched Explorer, which was minuscule compared to Sputnik. But the Russians were still ahead of you. I mean, they launched rocket after rocket, and you had failure after failure. So, put it this way when you launched your first Mercury astronaut, Shepard, he only went for a semi orbit. And then, what was it, a few hours up there, and then he came down. It wasn't until 1962 when you launched John Glenn that you achieved orbit, and he only had 7 on Friendship 7, right? And then, you got all you needed from Mercury and went into Gemini. And Gemini was to test whether two people could work up there and how to have 2 spaceships at once, which the Russians never did. The Russians never put 2, like Gemini's put 2 of them at once, docked with each other, had said hello, and all that. That was in preparation for the lunar module and everything that the Apollo program would need. So when the Apollo program came in, they were ready to start. But you forget that you had failures all over the place. You had rockets that didn't work, people that put their sweat and tears. And what I mean by sweat and tears is not like when you're sitting in drinking your iced tea in hot weather and you're sweating up a storm. I mean the pioneer sweat and tears. That's what you need, is the pioneer spirit, which you don't have no more. You did for a brief moment in 1957 to 69, but you don't have it anymore. You haven't had it since. Because remember this, Endeavor was political in origin. And it just so happens that 3 presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, took up the mantle. They didn't consider it a political, they considered it an achievement. But after Apollo 11 landed, and look at all the lives that were lost. I mean, you had Apollo 1 that all three of those astronauts, and they did a pretty good job in the Mercury and Gemini programs before that. They were established astronauts. And to this day, Apollo 1 is a misnomer that nobody even looks at. To me, that's the case that you had to do Apollo 11 to honor Apollo 1. But nobody looks at it that way. Bet you Mr. Harvey would have said the same thing. But after Apollo 11 landing on the moon and splashed down on Earth on, I believe it was July 24th, the president in charge in 1969, Richard Nixon, he didn't care a darn about this space program. He was a political guy. So he started chopping it up to pieces. So therefore, Apollo 12 got less funding than Apollo 11. Apollo 13, poor guys, you know what happened to Apollo 13. And then Nixon decided to set up some of those fundings to put Apollo 14 up to say that we can still do it. But Apollo 15 and 17 were the last two missions, because he had knocked NASA down to nothing. And look what happened. The Saturn V was never used again. It was put up to pasture. The Apollo capsule was never engineered to nothing better. It was used again with a Saturn 1B rocket for the Apollo-Soyuz mission in '75. But by that time, President Nixon was long gone, and President Ford was. President Ford, he was just an incumbent president, and he didn't elaborate on what was going on. So NASA's budget was disaster. And what came after Apollo? Well, NASA had an idea, but it didn't have the money. So they threw up Skylab, a disaster. Skylab had good ideas, but because it didn't have the money, it didn't have the backing, and it didn't have monetary and emotional backing, because you Americans, you turn your back. Just like Mr. Nixon and his politicals turned his back in 1969, you turn your back to the space program. And look at how it gave you. Cell phones, automatic coffee drippers, the stuff today. TVs that you don't even have to go and change the channel. And you don't give a credit where the credit is due. But there is no sweat and tears going on here anymore. And Mr. Harvey, if I may be so bold, I would ask, look at all the money you spent in those stupid wars that you had since Vietnam, which accomplished nothing. And then you have on TV, $19 a month for this and $19 a month for this. So can I be so bold, Mr. Harvey, and say, I know it's your commentary and I'm trying to do it like you did, but I'm going to be so bold today and say, okay, Americans, put where your money is, $19 a month, to make a program to set your descendants away from all this mess that you have created. Make them human. Make them that Earth stood for something at one time. Would you do that and get a new home? And forget about all this political mess? And let's make the Americans' ideals what the people who settled this country thought the ideals were. They gave their lives. They never knew what was going to come on after that. All those pioneers that came before you, they gave their lives because of Indians, the weather, each other, whatever it was. Well, they died in their way, but their descendants kept it up, something that you have forgotten. What do you say, Americans? This is my version of President Kennedy's, I want to put a man on the moon before the decade's out. Well, my version is I want to put humans on another planet similar to Earth before the year 2069. So let's do that $19 a month that you do for the SPCA, that you do for Shriners, that you do for those kids in Central America, which sometimes are probably old, that they don't remember you. What do? This is your favorite alien. And Bubba, sitting in for Paul Harvey today. Good day.